We'll continue now with the banana island economy that we first set up in graph 17.9. In panel A, we'll assume that both individuals have state-independent preferences, whereas in panel B, we'll allow one of the individuals to have state-dependent preferences. Recall that the 45-degree line connects the two corners of the Edgeworth box in this case, because the island as a whole faces no aggregate risk. No matter whether the dry or the rainy season hits, the overall production of bananas remains the same on the island. It's just the distribution of where bananas are produced changes. The endowment outcome allocation in the economy is such that person 1 gets the bulk of the bananas in the rainy season, whereas person 2 gets the bulk of the bananas in the dry season, in the absence of any trade between them. Prices in this economy establish the terms of trade on which individuals agree prior to knowing whether the rainy or the dry season hits. These prices form lines that can be treated as budget constraints, much as the insurance contract lines we drew earlier can be treated as budget constraints, and individuals will optimize along these constraints. The prices we've drawn here represent the terms of trade that the individuals would agree to if they agreed to insure one another in an actuarially fair way. When tastes are state-independent, individuals will always choose to fully insure if the insurance contracts they face are actuarially fair. We first showed this in graph 17.7. Full insurance occurs along the 45-degree line. So if individual 1 faces these actuarially fair insurance contracts and his tastes are state-independent, he will optimize at point A. The same is true for individual 2 if her tastes are state-independent. This implies that we have a tangency between the two indifference curves at point A, and the price line that we've drawn is in fact an equilibrium price line. So in an economy that faces no aggregate risk, where the individuals have state-independent preferences, the actuarially fair insurance terms are in fact the equilibrium insurance terms that emerge in the competitive equilibrium. In panel B, we'll replicate what we've done in panel A, continue to assume that person 1 has state-independent preferences, but now assume that person 2 has state-dependent preferences. In particular, we'll assume that for person 2, banana consumption is more meaningful in the rainy state than in the dry state. As a result, if person 2 faces the actuarially fair insurance line as her budget constraint, she will now no longer choose point A as her optimal point, but will rather settle on some point like B. This implies that the actuarially fair insurance terms are no longer competitive equilibrium insurance terms, because in order for prices to represent competitive equilibrium prices in the Edgeworth box, it must be the case that both individuals optimize at the same point in the Edgeworth box. In order for an equilibrium to be reestablished, it must therefore be that the insurance contract line becomes steeper, which will encourage person 1 to give up more bananas in the rainy state, and person 2 to want fewer bananas in the rainy state. A new equilibrium then emerges at a point like point C, where the indifference curves for the two individuals are again tangent to one another and tangent to the price line that's formed by the new equilibrium insurance contract terms. Notice that here, individual 1 now overinsures. He ends up consuming fewer bananas in the rainy state than in the dry state, whereas individual 2 gets more bananas in the rainy states than in the dry states. At the same time, we can see that individual 1 is actually better off than he would be if he faced actuarially fair insurance terms and optimized at point A. This should make sense. Individual 1 has a lot of bananas in the rainy state, and individual 2's preferences are state dependent in such a way that she'd really like to have a lot of bananas in the rainy state. So individual 1 has a lot of what individual 2 really wants. and so the equilibrium insurance terms will adjust so that they become favorable to individual 1. We can then see that the actuarially fair insurance terms will emerge in a competitive equilibrium in an economy that faces no aggregate risk, where everyone has state-independent preferences. But there's no particular reason to expect in this economy for actuarially fair insurance terms to emerge when one of the individuals, or both individuals, have state-dependent preferences.